The year 2020 will always be known as the year of the COVID-19 pandemic that disrupted economies and lives around the world. Amidst the chaos, Sonos released a trial of 3 new products in June. First is the Sonos Arc, an Atmos-capable soundbar. Second is the Sonos Sub Gen 3, and third is the Sonos Fives speakers. The Sonos Arc is a completely brand new product, but the Sonos Sub and the Fives are into their 3rd generation. Today, we have set up the trial for a full, complete review of the most powerful, complete system that Sonos has on offer. Now let's dive right into it. In my previous video on the Sonos Fives as a surround channel speaker, we have already determined that the Sonos Fives makes a real difference to the sound when used as surround in a home theater setup. The bass line is strong and it helps to fill up the entire room with great sound. But what if you already have a sub and the sub is already delivering the bass that you need? Would you then still need the Sonos Fives as a surround speakers? Wouldn't the cheaper Arc, Sub and the Sonos One combination make much better sense? So in my typical fashion of answering the question up front in the video, before we go into the details, let me give you the answer right away. And yes, it makes a difference. There's no doubt about it. The difference is actually quite marginal, and if I were to be forced to put a number to it, I'll say that the difference is less than a 5% performance boost of this setup over a Sonos Arc with the sub and the ones as the surround. But with all things hi-fi, when you are past a certain performance level, the incremental improvement will be very, very small with every dollar that you're putting in. So the only thing that you're going to have to get past yourself is the cost of admission to the most powerful Sonos home theater setup. If you're pressed for time, you can stop the video now and go away knowing that the most powerful Sonos setup with the Sonos Fives as the surround will give you a better sound, but at a much higher price point. Now, if money is no concern to you, then stop the video now, go right ahead and buy that pair of Sonos Fives for your surround sound channel. If you're still sticking around, let's dive a little deeper in to explore at how I arrive at this conclusion. Now, if you're looking for an Atmos-capable wireless setup, there's no question that this is the most powerful setup that Sonos has to offer for the home theater enthusiast for a price. The Sonos Arc comes in at $800, the Sonos Sub Gen 3 will set you back $700, and a pair of the Sonos Fives a staggering $1,000. This is for a grand total of $2,500. Let's contrast this to the setup of the same Arc and the Sub, but coupled with a pair of Sonos One for the surround channel. That would knock a huge $600 off the price tag, bringing it down to a very reasonable $1,900. The difference is further widened if you sensibly opt for the One SL without the voice assistant built in, since the Arc already comes with it. Now at $1,900, your options are still pretty endless. You have access to a great number of systems, both wired and wireless. You can choose between soundbars and discrete channel formats with a much more versatile AV receiver in the centerpiece. Now, if you bump the price up to $2,500, you can get some serious mid-range system capable of delivering great performance for your home theater. So like I said above, the cost of admission to the most powerful Sonos home theater setup is high. So before we talk about the system as a whole, I'd like to talk about the individual components here. First, the Arc. Now, I've done a whole series of videos on the Sonos Arc before, and I'm linking them up here. Now, in summary, the Sonos Arc is a wonderful soundbar that's capable of processing Atmos with the right TV. I've done a power draw test on the Sonos Arc before, and it clocked in at about 110 watts. Now, it's by no means the most powerful soundbar out there, but 110 watts is still respectable. The Arc isn't underpowered, but it does have its limitations. The bass isn't its strong suit, and it does struggle with the bass quite a bit. Either a function of the lack of the power to drive the drivers, because there are 11 of them inside, or the physical limitation of the size of the cones itself within this slim profile. And that's where the Sonos Sub Gen 3 will come in. I've also extensively tested various aspects of the Sonos Sub Gen 3, and here's the playlist link to all those videos. The Sub Gen 3 is a monster sub, and a power draw at the wall was tested right up to 299 watts, almost 300 watts. Now note that this is the power draw at the wall, not the music output, and if you measure it like some vendors do, the actual music output should be rated much higher. The sub brings some serious bass to the Arc. Now, well, actually the sub brings serious bass to any Sonos setup. Now, it is the most versatile piece of Sonos gear out there, and I highly recommend the sub. It goes down to 25 Hz very confidently, and it helps alleviate any of the bass issue that the Arc has. Not only that, when connected to a speaker or a soundbar, the sub actually allows them to perform their duties in the mid-range and the higher frequencies better, because they don't have to handle the lower frequencies anymore since the sub is doing the job. Now let's talk about the Sonos Five. I have not tested the power draw on the Sonos Fives officially before. I'll probably do a separate video on the power draw of the Sonos Five and compare them to a pair of the Sonos Fives playing back the same test tones. But for now, let's rely on a quick test that I've done before I started filming this video. I have a device here that tells me the total power draw of any electronic devices that I plug into it. I ran it through a couple of frequency tones just now, and I realized that the Sonos Fives draws the most power at about 56 Hz. For a quick test, I played the 56 Hz test tone through the Sonos Five, just one of them, and the reading at that point, it was drawing about 120 watts, give or take 3 watts or so. Now, that is a very quick test, not under the most controlled environment, but there you go. Each of these speakers are capable of delivering 120 watts on its own. So we have the Sonos Arc putting out 110 watts, the Sonos Sub throwing out 300 watts, and these guys putting out 120 watts each for a total of 240 watts. And if you add that all up, it's going to give you 650 watts, which is pretty impressive for a wireless home theater setup. Now this is what the $2,500 gives you, 650 watts of pure power. And I say pure power because that's the amount of power that is capable of drawing from the wall. Don't go comparing this with other advertised wattage of consumer products. The figure is not comparable. But let me tell you why this 650 watts doesn't mean much. Now we have to consider that the combined power draw of all the equipment when you put together in one setup. It is not just by adding all the individual power draw together. Why? Because when the sub takes away the bass duties from each of the speakers that is being paired up with, then the power draw and power requirements of the other speakers are going to go down. Without the bass duties, the speakers just aren't going to be using up all those power. Anyway, this is for reference only. None of us are going to be listening at peak volumes when watching a movie. In fact, if you go above 60% volume on this particular setup here, you're going to have to be prepared to handle the police when they come knocking on your door. Just explain to them that it came from the speakers and that there aren't actually gunshots being fired. So while it's clear that we weren't going to get the full power of 650 watts from the Sonos Arc Ultimate setup, we didn't know how much output this setup was capable of. But now, I'll tell you, I actually measured out all the power here, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So I have my MacBook connected to this setup, and the volume is pumped up to 100%. I will be generating a test tone from here, and the test tone that I'm using here to generate is 80 Hz. So the 80 Hz will play throughout all the devices that you're looking at here, from the Arc to the Sonos 5 pair and the Sub. And it's going to get pretty loud. I will lower the volume in a while. Now watch this meter as it peaks its power. So while it was clear that we weren't going to get the full power of the 650 watts from the Sonos Arc Ultimate setup, we didn't know how much power this setup was capable of when played all together. But now you know, it's about 210 watts thereabouts. Now, this is the reason why I say when you set up the Ultimate setup this way, you aren't going to get the full power that you expect in total. But it is more than the standard Arc and Sub and the Sonos One as surround channel setup. And this is really what you're paying the incremental $600 for. Now recently, when I was testing the Sonos 5 with and without a sub, I found that the sub crossed over the Sonos Fives at a relatively high crossover frequency of 115 Hz. The Sonos Fives are fully capable of going down to 30 Hz at the bottom end. So why Sonos would choose to cross the Fives over at 115 Hz to the sub baffles me. It is a complete waste of the Sonos Fives because they are more than capable of handling the bass. And the only reason I can think of is that the Sonos system in a whole surround sound setup is incapable of handling multiple crossover points. So it just sets it at the highest crossover point, which all the Sonos speakers, whether you put a 1 or a 3 or a 5 there, is going to be able to handle. So let's take a look at the frequency response chart that I have here. Now the blue line is a response of the Sonos Arc on its own. No sub, no surround. The green line represents the frequency response for the Sonos One or the Play One when it's connected as a surround speaker to the Sonos Arc. You see that they don't really go above the Arc in terms of frequency response, the exception being a slight gain below about 40 Hz. But bear in mind that at those levels and with such a big dip in the gain, you can't really hear those speakers producing those volumes anyway. But if you take a look at the red line, which represents the Sonos Fives when it's connected as surround to the Arc, you see a very powerful lift in the lower frequency range. And it goes all the way down to 30 Hz before it even tails off. And even when tailing off, it still retains a very powerful lift over the Sonos One and the Sonos Arc. Now, then let's discuss what happens when you add a sub to this setup. As I've mentioned before, the sub cuts over the whole setup at about 115 Hz. So I'm going to draw a bold vertical line in the middle where the sub will start to take over the lower frequencies. So the lower frequency prowess of the Fives will be lost here when you add a sub, because the sub is taking over those frequencies. But above that frequency, all the way from 115 Hz up, the red line representing the Fives as a surround still looks to be providing a very significant lift to the frequencies for the rest of the curves. So, while this is the most powerful setup that Sonos has to offer, the $600 extra actually doesn't buy a lot more. It is better, so you have to decide if the money is going to be well spent. If you want a wireless Atmos system that is easy to use and sounds great, and you won't settle for the second best in the Sonos ecosystem, then go for this ultimate Arc setup with the Sonos Sub Gen 3 and the Sonos Fives as the surround. There's no better setup within the Sonos product lineup today. I had wanted to make a frequency response test of the Sonos Arc and then adding the Sonos Sub and finally adding the Sonos Fives as the surround. It will give us a very good idea of what you're adding to the Sonos Arc setup every step of the way. But the video is going to be a little bit too long to add on to this video, so I'll leave that to a future video. Now, if you are keen to keep up with my videos, I do recommend that you subscribe to my channel. I put my focus on wireless audio products and I test them like nobody else on YouTube does. If you found this video useful, do leave a like and a comment, and welcome to my channel. If you're getting some form of value from my work, do consider making a small contribution to my coffee fund on Patreon, which I'm going to be linking down in the video description below. So do take care, and I'll see you in my next video. If you are pressed for time, you can stop the video now and go away knowing that the more powerful Sonos setup with the Sonos Fives as the surround.
The mic is muted.
Brr.